most of the time, uh, you see the lie on the front page with the big picture, and the New York Times has done this several times, right? So I'll remind our audience of the hospital in Gaza that supposedly the Israelis had bombed, and then it turned out it was discovered only thanks to a video that was taken by the people in Gaza, right? Thanks to that video, it was people were able to show that in fact it was a missile from the terrorists that had failed to launch and that had fallen on the parking lot of the hospital. The hospital had not been destroyed; it was just the parking lot that had been destroyed. The missile came from the terrorists, not from the Israelis. And the photograph that the New York Times used was not even of that hospital. They used a photograph of an entirely different building, pretending that it was the supposedly bombed hospital, right? So the New York Times does this all the time, right? That was relatively famous. It happened at the beginning of the war in Gaza. Now they're trying to convince us that there's starvation in Gaza, with a child who is obviously not starving, and neither is his family, right? And as you say, when this is pointed out by an independent journalist, because if the independent journalist had not existed, nobody would have ever known that the New York Times had lied to us. Okay, so thank God for independent journalism. So, but once that happens, once the independent journalist puts up the evidence, right, the medical evidence of this child, and the New York Times is forced to correct themselves, they do it, as you say, in the back pages. Almost nobody sees it normally. And even though the lie was technically corrected, it is corrected in a way that keeps the narrative going for almost everybody. Everybody, right? And this is how the reality is managed. This is how the reality is managed, and these news outlets manage to keep themselves, sometimes, not always, but sometimes they manage to keep themselves technically within the bounds of, you might say, what is it? Accurate reporting, at least accurate correction. But meanwhile, the false narrative is what remains in everybody's head. Okay, this is how reality is managed. There is no starvation going on in Gaza.